Welcome to Leading Ladies of Rio Rancho, brought to you by the Rio Rancho Observer. During this series, we will invite business and community leaders from Rio Rancho and its surrounding communities in Sandoval County for conversations on what they do, why they do it, and the issues they face. I'm your host, Tracy Goldeisen, editor of the Rio Rancho Observer. Welcome. Hello and welcome. Today's guest is Barbra Romo, District Attorney for the 13th Judicial District here in New Mexico, which covers, you said, Sandoval, Cibola, and Valencia counties?
Correct.
Okay. Do you just want to take a moment, introduce yourself and a little bit of your background and your position?
Sure. Again, my name's Barbra Romo. I am a career prosecutor. I started my career as an attorney here in New Mexico in 1996 down in Socorro and Truth or Consequences. After I passed the bar, and I've been here ever since. I've been a career prosecutor, so I don't know. You can do the math yourself, but I started out in the 7th Judicial District, and then I worked for several years up in Santa Fe, where I headed up the Crimes Against Children unit until I moved down to. I was already living in Rio Rancho when I commuted to Santa Fe, but I accepted a position as an assistant district attorney in the 13th in 2011. I moved up through the ranks to eventually become the chief deputy before I ran for election in 2020, and I took office in 2021.
Okay. For those who don't know, what is a district attorney's role in the community, and why is it an elected position?
Well, the role, I'm not sure why it's an elected position. In some states, I believe it's an appointed position. In some states, it's a hybrid. Like in our state, for judges, it's a hybrid. So in other words, a judge can be appointed or a judge can be elected. But as the district attorney, I believe, should be an elected position because we represent the will of the people to the extent that we answer to the people if we don't sufficiently prosecute the crimes and do our part to keep the community safe. A district attorney is responsible, it's the chief law enforcement officer in whatever district you represent. So I'm the chief law enforcement officer for those 3 counties that you mentioned, and I'm responsible for prosecuting all felonies that occur in the district as well as misdemeanors, some misdemeanors. We have discretion on what misdemeanors we prosecute, with the exception of domestic violence and DWI, which by statute we prosecute. So that's essentially what we do. There's a lot more to it than that, but that is our statutory obligation and duty to do.
Okay. And so you talked about you've been a prosecutor your entire life. What brought you into the field of law, and then how did you decide to run to be the district attorney for our counties? Well,
as far as why I went to law school, I joined the Army, and I was in ROTC, and then I wanted to go on active duty just for a little while. My husband was a veteran. He talked me into going in, and I went on active duty for 5 years. And while I was on active duty, as an officer, you have to be involved in the military justice system. So with that, I sort of got interested in it. And it was actually my husband, I have to say, who said, "Why don't you go to law school when you get out?" And I'm like, "Law school? I don't know. Really never thought about it. I'm not that smart." But then the more I thought about it, I was like, well, let's see. I like to argue. I like to write. I'm kind of smart. So I'll give it a shot. So I applied to law school, got into law school, went back to Nebraska for law school just because that's where I was from.
Oh, okay.
I had my undergraduate there. My mom and brothers and sisters were there. So I knew if I went back there for 3 years, at least my kids who had been born in the Army while I was in Germany, they would have a chance to get to know their grandma and grandpa and cousins. So.
Sure.
But then I knew that I didn't want to stay in Nebraska just because it's too cold.
Well, I'm from Iowa, and that's why we moved away.
It's too cold. But I love New Mexico. I go back to the Midwest to visit every year, obviously, and I love it. I love the people, but I can't see myself ever moving from New Mexico. This is my home now. And when I was in law school, I have to say, honestly, I never considered being a prosecutor or even criminal law. I thought I was going to be an employment lawyer or maybe a personal injury lawyer because I always had kind of a desire or an affinity for helping people that I thought were wronged, Yeah. But for some reason, it never occurred to me, hey, criminal justice system.
Right. But
when I moved down here, the first job I got was as a prosecutor down in Truth or Consequences. And honestly, when I first took the job, I was like, I'll do this till I find something else.
Yeah.
But as soon as I started prosecuting, and honestly, probably after my first jury trial, I was like, this is what I was meant to do. This is where I'm supposed to be. And I've never looked back. So I was recruited by a couple of law firms along the way, and I considered it, but I just, sometimes you have to go with what your heart tells you is right. Yeah. And I just always felt that this is where I was supposed to be. And, after I had been prosecuting almost 20 years, there really was no place else for me to go except for to be the elected district attorney. And I knew from having worked in 3 district attorney offices that there were things that I could do in that position to help people and help the community that I really couldn't do as an assistant or someone underneath the boss. So I guess those are the main reasons that I hope I answered the question.
No, no, that's all very interesting. And to your knowledge, are there a lot of female district attorneys in the state?
In the state, let's see, we have now 2, 3. We have 3. Let's see, myself, Mary Carmack Alwas, Diana Luce, Bernadine, 4. Bernadine Martin from Gallup. So there's 4.
Okay. All right. And then is there ever a time where a district attorney or their office has to recuse themselves from a case, and what instances would that be?
Well, there is a statutory provision, and it's spelled out in the statute, but in lay terms, it's basically whenever there is a case that comes to the office where I feel that there's a conflict of interest in our office prosecuting it. Ordinarily, it's either, it's something that deals with one of my employees, or, if one of my employees or their family member is the victim or is charged with a crime, then that would be a situation where I would ask one of the other district attorneys to prosecute it. Okay. Another common situation is officer-involved shootings.
Okay, yeah.
Now, there are a lot of districts and offices throughout the country, and there's kind of 2 different avenues of thought. The first avenue of thought is, this is mine. Mm-hmm. This happened in my district. Yeah. I should be responsible for it, and I'll have complete transparency. When I make a decision, everybody can come in and look at it. The other train of thought, which most of the district attorneys in this state ascribe to, is you're too close to that. Right. You work with those officers every day, especially if it's an officer that you've dealt with personally, right? Or that your prosecutors have dealt with personally. It's just too hard to be objective. Right. So those cases, I don't ask another district attorney to prosecute it, because my feeling would be, well, that's just, if I was a member of the public, I'd be thinking, well, you're all in the same club. You're gonna, So I was like, well, so I get outside counsel. I contract with an outside attorney to look at those and make a decision, without my input. So those are the most common kind of situations. Okay.
It sounds like it would be a job with long hours. So how many hours a week would you say you work?
Oh, well, that really varies. Especially as the elected, it varies. I mean, it varies from, a normal work week to it could be up to 70 hours a week. But I have to say, and the line attorneys, they put in way more hours than the elected. That's just that the elected has different hours. You know, my hours are not, I'm often working at night or on weekends and things of that nature. But yeah, it's for the average prosecutor, it's not a 9-to-5 job.
Right.
So it takes a lot of dedication and really desire to want to do this job, to keep doing it as a career.
Yeah. So in our office, what is the staffing level? How many people are working in the office, and what's an average case volume for one of your workers?
I have allocated through the legislature 82 positions. That's in 3 counties, and that includes all the support staff as well as the prosecutors. I'm allocated 32 attorneys. Right now, we have, we just hired somebody, I think, so we are now at 23. Okay. So we are 9 attorneys short in 3 counties.
Okay.
So that kind of leads to your next question. Because of that, that's why our attorney caseloads are so high.
Right.
And the average last year, we just presented to the budget, and that's one of the things they ask us about. And last year, for the last fiscal year, the average was 289. Now, that's not everybody has 289.
Right.
For example, the magistrate attorneys are going to have a higher caseload because those move faster.
Right.
The prosecutors who do the violent crimes, like the child abuse and the homicides, their caseload may be lower, but their cases are more time intensive. So any way you look at it, it's just there's too much work for too few attorneys. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Okay. And so you're currently working to find more attorneys
Always.
to fill those.
If anybody is an attorney and listening and wants to apply, please. I'm always looking for good attorneys, and it's funny because I've heard other people. It's not that I don't get applications. I do get applications. But even though we're shorthanded, I do have high standards.
Right.
And I mean, I have certain standards that I'm not going to lower.
Yeah, you don't want to have somebody in there just to have somebody in there.
No, and I know some of my predecessors as well as other district attorneys' offices follow a mentality that, hey, well, at least it's a warm body. I have found through experience that never works out in the end.
Yeah.
It never works out. It causes more problems than it's worth. So yeah, sometimes I have to be selective, but I'm not impossibly selective. But I do have standards, and my people know what those are, and they're expected to meet them.
Okay, and is this a role in where there's a lot of turnover? Like maybe people get burnt out and look for something else, or
yes, burnout is a real problem. And again, all these things go together.
Yeah.
Because the higher the caseload, the more likely you are to burn out. Because you put that in conjunction with the fact that the salaries that we're authorized to pay from the legislature are not comparable, not even close to comparable to what people can get in the private sector, or even with other state jobs.
Yeah.
And so we also get a lot of new prosecutors or new attorneys out of law school. They try being a prosecutor, they get some experience, and then they go to the law firms because they have trial experience. Yeah. Or honestly, sometimes people just don't know what they want.
Yeah.
And they start as a prosecutor and they're like, this isn't really for me.
Yeah.
Or we have to tell them, I don't think this is really for you.
Yeah.
But the turnover that I've had, I have to say, has mostly been with the younger and the less experienced attorneys. I've been very fortunate that most of my experienced attorneys have not left. A couple of them, one of them left and came back. So I've been really lucky, and I think that's why I've continued to have success despite that, because I have a core group of senior attorneys and other staff who kind of keep things going. And, despite the shortages and the turnover, we just keep doing what we're doing. And yeah.
And you mentioned it earlier, crimes against children. And I know that's been one of the things you've spoken to before in other meetings I've been in with you. And you even had a conference on it last year, did you not?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you see that becoming an annual event or a regular thing?
We're trying. That's our goal. We depend. We're going to have it this year. We'll find a way to have it. It's the thing when you deal with grants and that kind of thing. There's all sorts of steps and bureaucracies that you have to wade through, and we're still doing that. We're hopeful that we'll get another grant. From CYFD, if you're listening, CYFD. But regardless, we're looking at other funding sources just in case, because yes, we fully intend to have another child abuse conference. It was very successful, very well attended, and there really hasn't been anything like that in New Mexico for a long, long time. And it's necessary because those crimes, unfortunately, they keep happening. They're hard.
So sad.
It's sad. It's hard. They're hard. And people don't want to acknowledge that they happen. Prosecutors, I won't assign those cases to a prosecutor unless they really want to do them, because they're hard.
Yeah.
And you talk about burnout. That's where you're going to have a lot of burnout.
Yeah.
But they are. It's important, and I think there's a continuing need. So as long as I'm able to, and I'm going to keep putting on that conference.
Well, and like you said, obviously it's an issue, especially with all the CYFD issues that have been going on. It's obviously a problem that needs addressed in the state.
It is. And, I found that, when you get a lot of the experts and other professionals that work with these cases and with kids together, and you share ideas, you realize, it takes away a lot of that burnout factor, because it's just like when you go home and you vent,
right.
Or in the office we vent to each other. Well, when you're talking to other professionals and you're saying, oh, well, I had that kind of situation too. Well, how did you deal with it? Well, I did this and that. Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So I guess my situation isn't as bad as I thought. And also the networking aspect, because the bigger network we have of people who can share ideas and help each other with these cases, then, the more success we're going to have, and the better we're going to be able to serve the kids that are being treated or not being treated the way they should be treated.
Right. And while we've been discussing burnout a little bit, the mental and emotional toll of a role like this, how do you minimize that? And how do you relax in your off time?
Well, I minimize it by, first of all, it's one of the things that I stress for my staff, all of them, whether you're an attorney or a support staff. I tell them, because they know, our mission is to seek justice, right? So yes, we have a very important job. However, what I tell them, and I stress it, nothing is more important than your health and your family. Those things are first, because all of this, we'll take care of it while you go take care of your stuff.
Right.
Because that's the only way that you can really keep from getting burnt out in this job. I'll just tell you, I don't hide from it. I faced burnout after Santa Fe. I got a DUI, and it took me by surprise. In a way, it took me by surprise, because I never felt myself getting burnt out.
Right.
But I can remember people saying, you're doing a
always
lot.
the last
Are you
one
sure
to see it?
that's, nah, I'm fine. But I wasn't fine. And, it's ironic that the people, especially prosecutors, but also support staff, the ones that are the most dedicated, that want to, they're the ones that you have to worry about the most. Because, what happened to me, and it's not an excuse, believe me, but when I got so into prosecuting and helping on child abuse cases that I had put myself, I'm available throughout the state, 24/7. Anybody that has a question, law enforcement, prosecutor, I'm the person. Call me. And so, I was fortunate, first of all, that I didn't kill anybody, and I was fortunate that I had a family that stood by me. I took 2 years off to work with victims and victims' rights after I got the DUI, and of course, I have a lot of defense attorney friends. Oh, well, we can help you. We can get you off. And I thought about it, and I was like, I've been spending my whole career asking people to take responsibility. Right. How can I not take responsibility? I'm guilty. I did it. So that plus my kids, I said, I've got to take responsibility, and whatever happens, happens. But I believe that things happen for a reason. And what I learned from that, I have passed on to mentor new attorneys, old attorneys, support staff, because there is honestly, and I mean that, and I have made my prosecutors go to counseling. I've made them. I can't make them, but I've after cases they've had that were just so traumatic, I've sent them to counseling to mitigate that. Whenever I know something's going on, I've had to say, you need to go home.
Yeah.
This is not important. I had a person, I won't say her name, but she's in a very senior position. This woman, for God's sakes, was about to have surgery. And she's calling me and saying, well, Barb, I don't know if I can come back after the surgery, but I can probably be there the next day. And I'm like, would you stop? You're starting to anger me now. Knock it off.
Yeah.
So those are the people I worry about, but that's the way I do it. I just by, actively practicing it and making sure all my people and my supervisors especially know that that's important. That's the most important thing. All of this is going to be here long after we're gone.
Right.
But we only have one family. And, we only get one chance to get that right. I don't want people to look back and say, well, I couldn't because I had that job.
Right. And I mean, speaking of, having people take time off when something has really gotten to them. I remember the first time I ever had to cover a fatality. My editor, my publisher looked at me when I got back in the office. They're like, turn in your photos and go home. Take the day. So, I mean, I think that mentality is great.
Yeah, and I think it's starting to become more recognized, not only throughout our state, but in other states. Our administrative office of the district attorney that puts on training every year, they have started to include classes on self-care, etc. In my child abuse conference, I included a conference on that. I mean, a section on that, or a class on that. And it's funny because when I went in there early to talk to the speaker, and I know him, Dr. David Lisak, he's well known nationally and internationally. But when I came in to talk to him and introduce him, he's like, and there was this people pouring in. We had to turn people away. We didn't have enough seats. And he's like, I'm really surprised. I was like, why are you surprised? I was like, and the class was at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, wow.
So I figured this subject, this early, there wouldn't be anybody. And it was amazing. And people were just sharing stories, and everybody started realizing, hey, it's not just me.
Right.
And that's important. And even this summer, the National District Attorneys Association is having a whole conference just dealing with that issue.
Oh, wow.
So it's, yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to, and what are your thoughts on the perception that New Mexico is now a catch and release state when it comes to criminals?
Well, unfortunately, my position, I can comment on laws, but I don't get to choose which laws I follow and which laws I don't.
Yeah.
I will say that I think the amendment to the Constitution and, that made all this happen several years ago, it was well-intentioned. It is well-intentioned. But I don't think that it takes into account enough, how do I say this, the propensity of people to commit crimes. So in other words, the judges only have so much that they can take into account, right?
Right.
They're not allowed to take into account other things. And I think there was a bill in the legislature this year to try to change that, to expand. And I'm not sure, I lost track of where that bill went. But every year the fact that every year there's legislation to try to modify it tells you it's not working.
Right.
And the thing that I've observed, and I've testified to this before the legislature, is that there's no consistency. There's no consistency because the judges have a lot of discretion, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. But then you're going to you can't compare apples and oranges. For example, there was an article, I think, in the paper where Gerald Byers, the DA in Las Cruces, was talking about, his rate of success in the pretrial detention motions. But the pretrial detention motions, you have to, in our office, I'm not saying what other offices do, please understand, but I've made it very clear to my prosecutors, this is the criterion the judge has to look at.
Yeah.
So even though you may want this person in jail, if he can't establish that person is a danger right now to the community, to other people, the judge don't bother. You know, I mean, and there's some cases where it's kind of counterintuitive. Okay, for example, a criminal sexual penetration of a child. Let's just say this person had been molesting a girl, boy, doesn't matter, for 10 years. Now the person is an adult, the victim's an adult, and they want to prosecute. You want to put that person in jail, and you want them to stay in jail. But if you look at it from the judge's perspective, how is he really a danger? He hasn't had contact with this child for so many years, and there's no evidence that he's done it to any other child. Doesn't really fit the criteria. So even though the judge may want to, when he or she's looking at that criteria, it just doesn't fit.
Legally, they can't.
So I believe that, it needs some adjustment. I'll leave that to bigger minds to figure out. But it is a concern. I will say in my district, we have been pretty successful with our judges. The cases we brought to them, we've had a pretty high success rate. And again, I think that's because we don't present all the cases that we might have in the past just because we know the criteria. So, yeah, I think it does limit the judges and what they can consider, and to that extent, I think there can be improvements.
Okay, and you mentioned the legislative session and being up there, and this year's session just closed. So, what roles in that process would a district attorney take if you're doing something up in Santa Fe during the session?
Well, the first active role that we have, all of the district attorneys every year have to present their proposed budget. We present it to two committees, the House and the Senate, and first we submit our budgets to the Legislative Finance Committee and to the Department of Finance, so that and then when they make a recommendation, and then we all go and we individually present our budget to the legislator, the committees, and then they decide what they're going to give us. That's the first formal thing. The other thing is, like in the past, because there's 30-day and 60-day sessions. The 30-day sessions traditionally have been devoted to the budget, and this year, the governor wanted the crime legislation, which I don't think she got everything done she wanted to. I don't know if you can ever get everything done you want to on that issue, but so, during those sessions, the district attorneys, it depends on, I tend to be less involved just because I don't, I unless I'm asked to go up there and testify as an expert, I will help I'll help the other district attorneys and the administrative office of the district attorneys if there's a bill we're following. Like, you mentioned this bill, the legislature. We mentioned this bill about modifying the so-called catch and release. Well, then we make sure that we make sure there's one of the district attorneys available, and so we do that. I also have a bill that I've been trying to get passed for several years, and I didn't try to present it this year. I can't present it; it has to go through a representative. But I will represent it in the 60-day and keep trying until I get it passed. And all that is it's to make, in New Mexico, like every other state now, we have victims' rights. Right. They're in our Constitution. They're in they're in the Bill of Rights, just like, all of our other most precious rights. But they are enumerated, which means, if someone burglarizes your house, that's unfortunate, but you don't have any of the victim rights because it's not enumerated, right? The same is true for crimes against law enforcement officers. So battery on a peace officer, aggravated, so you can stab, shoot, punch, whatever you want. A law enforcement officer, you'll be prosecuted, but the officers that are victims have no rights. And that's what I'm trying to get passed. So next session, 60-day, I'll be back again until I get it passed.
So you sometimes help craft some bills then?
Yes.
As well? Okay.
Exactly.
Do you have any other bills that you would like to see move through, or even regarding the public safety this year, there's the governor's hinted that she might call for a special section. Do you see that happening?
Well, if I was a betting person, I would say I think she probably will, only because I think there are things she wanted to get accomplished that she couldn't because it was just too short of a session.
Right.
You know, one thing you learn when you start getting involved in the legislative session, it's a process. It's a process, and way more bills are introduced that ever get heard.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, the person who's the proponent, you don't, I have the representatives that help me, they have to go and try to lobby behind the scenes. And I, you know, obviously I go with them and things of that nature. But, you know, the reality is the chairman of the committees can choose to put it on or they can choose not to put it on. So, you know, and I'm not denigrating them or criticizing them. I mean, they have whatever criteria they have.
Yeah.
They have to decide, and there's a lot of them to choose from.
There's a lot to get done in a short amount of
So
time.
that, you know, that's the hard thing. I mean, it is. I encourage everybody, if you have time, to go up and just kind of watch and see how the process is, because it is a I remember, I don't know, I'm going to date myself here, but there used to be a cartoon where it talked about, you know, the bill and how it got through the
Yeah. And they Schoolhouse Rock or something like that.
And I remember that. It's like it is like that, but there's quite a few more steps in there than that.
That's the highlighted version, the Cliff's Notes version.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. That's all the questions I had prepared. Is there anything else that you want to speak to, or?
Well, I guess I just want to put in a plug for the career of prosecutor and public defender. You know, I will say, since I started, the salaries have gotten significantly better. When I first started, I wasn't making a lot of money. I was lucky because I had my husband and he has his military retirement. But I will say that if you stay with it, eventually you will, you know, you can make a pretty good living.
Yeah.
But more importantly than that, despite all the frustrations and the heartache, and it is a very rewarding job. You know, I would say, you know, the times when you have a jury trial, for example, and when you're in a jury trial, especially if you have a child who's a victim and their parents, and you're, you know, you feel the weight of their hope and desire on your shoulders, okay? So when it doesn't turn out right, you're devastated with them. But you have to find a way to take that and let it go, right? But on the other hand, I found that even in those cases, if you're honest with the victim, and I talk to the kids as little as 5, 6, 7. They know what they want. They really do.
Oh, wow.
I remember one time I asked a little 5-year-old who had been molested by her grandpa. I said, well, because I know, so gosh, this is so hard. I mean, they got conflicting feelings. It's still grandpa.
Right.
She doesn't understand why he's doing things she doesn't like, but it's still grandpa, right? So I always kind of broach that subject because I don't want to, make their trauma worse by saying your grandpa's a monster or something like that. So I asked this little girl, well, you know, what do you think of your grandpa now? I try not to think about him at all. See, things like that, you're just like, ugh. But, you know, I found that if you're honest with the victims in the beginning, let them know, this is what the process is. This is what I'm going to do. Now, the defense is going to say something completely different because that's their job. The jury has to decide. They're going to hear both sides. They may find not guilty, but if they do, it's not because they didn't believe you. Sometimes it is, but I never tell the victim that.
Yeah.
It's because they had a hard time deciding. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then when they sit in there and they hear you making the arguments, they know that you believe them, and that's a lot for them.
Yeah.
And even in the cases where there's been not guilty verdicts, I still have contact with those victims. They still, it helped in their healing. That's what I learned. The conviction is important, but that's not the most important thing to help with the healing. The most important thing is that they're supported, they're believed, and that they get whatever help they need to move forward.
They have somebody who hears them.
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, and that's what's hard for, because prosecutors, our goal is not to get convictions. That sounds weird. We do. I mean, by the time, and I tell my prosecutors, by the time you get in that courtroom, you should believe in that case 100% or you shouldn't be there. Now, does that mean you know 100%? No. We never know because we weren't there. But if you don't believe it in 100%, you have no business asking the jury to do the same.
Right.
But understand, too, that if you do these cases, you're probably going to lose about half of them. What? Yeah, because jurors have a hard time deciding. And it is a very hard thing for someone to decide. And it's hard. You look at someone that looks like your neighbor, it's hard to envision that they could really do something so horrible, right? Plus the fact that kids aren't the best witnesses.
Yeah.
They're easy to confuse. They're easy to, they get confused. They don't, they're not consistent in their stories, but that's because nobody's consistent in their stories.
Yeah.
When you talk about the first day on this job, do you tell it the same way when you talk to your mom as when you talk to your best friend? No.
Well, and their sense of time is so different, too.
Yes, absolutely.
So okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for
thank
coming
you for
in
having me.
talking
I
with
enjoyed
us.
it. It was a blast.
And, sharing your story and what you do and what your passions are. And, it's just fascinating. There's so much there.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. It was fun.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you for joining us as well.